Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of The Sick Sexy. If you're new to the channel, hi, my name is Sophia Anna. I post once a week about all things invisible illness, disability, life, and relationships. And this week on The Sick Sexy, I have the absolute pleasure of sharing with you a very candid conversation I got to share with one of Australia's leading performance and mindset coaches, Michael Johnson, A.K.A. the Mojo Master. The Mojo Master is groundbreaking in his work because not only is he a keynote speaker, a leading entrepreneur in his field with years of knowledge from all over the world, he has helped hundreds of thousands of people unlock their true potential through his leading event, Thrive Time. So if you're interested in hearing more, I will leave all of his information in the socials down below. But let's jump into the interview that I'm very excited to share with you. Here's part one. I'd like to say thank you again for being a part of The Sick Sexy and coming on and jumping on and having an honest conversation about what it is that you do. For those of you who don't know who the Mojo Master is, although I would be very surprised, can you give us a little bit of background about what it means to be a mindset and performance coach and what it is that you teach people?
Yeah, look, I think from my studies, and as you can see behind me, I love doing a lot of research and a lot of study. Originally I started off as a personal trainer. Before that I was a diesel mechanic. So I was lost, didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life when I finished school. And what I found was that most people were just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And a lot of them were miserable. A lot of guys were going up to the mines, working in mining, and they were coming back. They had all this money, which I thought would make people happy, and they were coming back miserable. And I thought, well, hang on. I was always told that we need to get a good career, a good education to get a good job, so that when we have a good job, then we can earn money. And then when we make money, we buy a house and get married and have kids and, do all that sort of stuff. And then we're happy and we're successful. But what I found was it was, for most people, was the opposite. The faster they got a job, got married, had kids, bought a house, it seemed like the more miserable they became. Now, that wasn't always the case. There was always exceptions to the rules, but I wanted to find out what was it that made people successful. Anyway, I ended up becoming a personal trainer because I just knew that it wasn't what I didn't love being a diesel mechanic. And exercise was the only thing that made me feel good. And I had mental health issues when I was a kid. I got expelled from school at 15 and I wanted to end my own life. And then I also had my best friend's 3-year-old niece was killed in a car accident when I was I think I was about 19 or 20. And it put everything into perspective, which was that life can just end just like that. And a lot of the time we might not have that choice of when life ends. But what I do know is that we're getting closer to the end every day. So it made me think differently about life. So, and I'm answering the question about the performance coach thing because it'll all make sense in a minute. But what started happening was when I was working in the gym, I worked in there for about 7 or 8 years and won awards. And I started going out and teaching other people and educating other people in the personal training industry. Because back when I was a trainer, it wasn't a common thing. Personal trainers were like these jugheads that would just lift heavy weights, almost like bodybuilder types, but not really scientific. And sports teams only just they'd go to the gym after a hard training session, they'd drink beer while they trained. It wasn't like it is now. And so I started seeing that, we need to educate people, that we're working with people's lives here. And the gym made me feel good about myself. And I thought maybe I can help other people to feel that same way. And it gave me confidence in who I was. As I went on, I realized that there was a lot of injuries, a lot of physical injuries. So I went back and I studied some nutrition and studied kinesiology in order to help people. And then I ended up working in a medical center for 3 years doing physical rehabilitation and like Pilates and strength and conditioning. And I was working with athletes. What I started realizing in the medical center was that most people in life know what to do. They just don't do it. And so I started thinking, why are people not doing things that they know are going to benefit them? And I knew I was doing a lot of things in my life that weren't benefiting me, like drinking a lot and eating Maccas. And so I was thinking, what is that thing? Now, I remember doing psychology as a component to personal training. And back when I studied personal training, it was almost like 2 years of study. And I just remember thinking, what is this bullshit? Why am I watching this stuff on like psychology and whatever? Like, you just go to the gym, you train. It's not that fucking hard. I hope you don't mind me swearing, by the way.
Not at all.
So that's how I thought about psychology. And I think most people think like that. They just go, oh, it's bullshit. You know, you just wake up, you go to work, you come home, and you don't really think about the impact that every single thought that you have throughout the day influences your future in some way, shape, or form. And it wasn't until I was in the medical center one day where I was with this big burly guy, had a beard, and he looked pretty rough. He looked like a bikie, and I said, how's your back going? And I'd seen him in there for months, and he just burst into tears and he said, Michael, I've been looking after my back. I've been doing everything that I've been doing my physio work, and he said I still can't work. Like my back is in pain, but the physio is saying that there's no problem in my back, that there's not that they can see, and they think that it's all in my head. And he burst into tears, and he made it sound like he was insane, like they'd suggested that he was insane because he had to go see a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And I started thinking, this is weird. Like all these people are sick and they keep coming back, and a lot of the same people were back in the medical center every week, and they were always just sick and had these illnesses. And with my background in nutrition and personal training and studying a bit of kinesiology and working with the physios, and I just had this thing of learning. So I wanted to learn off of everybody. I don't judge people for their career paths. I think there's something to learn off of everybody in the medical industry or the health industry, from holistic to scientific. And so I was just very inquisitive. And I started looking at how the mindset worked. And I remember in my early 20s, the impact that just listening to my first motivational personal development program had on my mindset and how much I'd changed. And I went, I think that's the missing link. So I dove into that quite heavily. And, that's been driving my life for the past 10 or 11 years, is just studying how our brain works and how it affects everything that we do, from every thought that we have and how that changes. Our thoughts change the neurochemistry. They can change our biology through our hormonal sequencing. They can change our cellular structures based on our epigenetics. And what I started realizing when I studied lots of different scientific fields was that really it is our thought processes and the perceptions that we create that almost drive every other single part of our human experience. So I guess in short response to your question, what is a mindset coach and a performance coach? It's figuring out how do we change our thought processes or our perceptions, whether it's the past or the future, in order to drive our behavior to achieve the things that we love to do or the things that we would love within our life, to live an optimal life, whether that be run $100 million or $1 billion business. And, I'm fortunate enough to work with some of those people, right through to being a professional athlete, to being a great mum, to being an amazing dad, to having a more balanced life, to people who travel a lot. Like, how do we achieve that? Because every one of us is unique. So we all have these unique ways that we think about life. And after watching kids as well, every child I've ever met has always displayed traits of being an extraordinary person. But then I watch people when they get to their teenage years into young adults, and they start to lose that extraordinary way of living and thinking, and they become very rigid. And as they age, most people get more rigid, more grumpy, more upset, more frustrated, more sick, more disease, all of those things. And I watch that and I go, is that how we're supposed to live? And biologically, I don't believe the answer is yes. So what I want to know is, how is it that as we get older, life gets better, not worse? Yeah. Okay. And I wanted to be a prime example of that. I know now my life is way better now as a 37-year-old than it was at 21. And my body is physically, I can perform better as a 37-year-old than what I could at 21.
That's amazing.
So I want to share that. And I believe that comes through our perceptions and the way that our brain works, the way that our mind works, and the way that we think.
Because you discuss a lot about the difference between having logical intelligence and having emotional intelligence, and how when you are in that emotional state, it is very hard to make logical, rational decisions. And you've talked a lot about how you've used journaling constructively to separate the two so that you can compartmentalize and come from a place of understanding, rather than having an emotion and letting that guide the decisions that you make. In your professional opinion, because obviously you've had a lot of experience with education, do you think educating yourself throughout your entire life has helped you to make better decisions with regard to not coming from an emotional place? And do you think that why do you think that we are kind of hardwired to come from an emotional place and make decisions that don't help us, or we lose that part of ourselves that perhaps made us confident as children, but in adulthood as you said, we've lost that spark? How do you
Yeah,
think to
it's a
fruition?
great question. I'm really impressed. You've done a lot of research, or you've done research, and I like that. It's very good. Um, but yeah, look, I've asked the same questions because I'm really inquisitive. And, I get criticized because I'm not university trained, although I have a lot of university professionals who come to my events and seminars and who want to learn this. And sometimes they feel trapped by their profession because they have guidelines and rules that they have to follow. And if they don't, they get their license to practice taken away. So a lot of them are really scared to push boundaries. And a lot of them come up to me and say, I think you've done the right thing. But at the same time, there are lots of other people who are following the guidelines who feel entitled that they should know the answer, yet they don't. And so when someone criticizes their industry, they lash out at someone like me. But I mean, I've been inquisitive, really trying to find out why is it that we do think the way that we do. And what I've been able to break things down to is that if we have a look, I believe that I won't get into cosmology or anything like that too much. And when I talk about cosmology, I'm actually talking about the scientific cosmology, and astrophysics and that sort of stuff. But what I've been able to find out, and this is part of the theory that I have at the moment, is that if we have a look, everything is part of an evolution. Mm-hmm. And if we have a look at human behavior as an evolution, and we go back to the idea of origin and, Darwin's theory, supposedly we came from bacteria. That's how humans came to this earth. And that's how we started out. And then, we found that supposedly the theory is, and this sort of makes sense to me, but it may or may not, depending on your belief system, that from a single cell organism, we found that single cell organism, as just same as an individual person, it's more constructive in life and it's safer to have multiple people working together for a common objective. So if we look at evolution and we have a look at how the sperm and the egg come together, it pretty much goes through every stage of origin, supposedly based on Darwin's theory. So from the second that the sperm hits the egg, you're essentially imprinting information from the mother and the father, which is information that comes together in a biological structure and then starts to go through all the stages of evolution based on Darwin's theory, right through to where it comes out as a human. But as a human, it's pretty much almost the most primitive form of human. So you get a baby, it can't use its arms, it can't use its legs, it can't really think effectively. And you put it on a back, on the child on its back in its bed or its cot. And when you come back, it's down the other end of the bed. And the way that it does that is it uses its spine to move almost like a serpent, and it develops spinal stability. So you've got all of those stages of evolution happening. Now, once we get to, let's say, maybe 2-3 years of age, it's now starting to communicate and learn how to connect with other people. And so now it starts fitting in. It starts fitting into the tribe. Now, this again is a very primitive human evolution where we feel we need to fit in order to feel safe, and we need to survive. So a young child is trying to figure out how to fit in, how to stay safe. And every organism on the planet that's alive that I've been able to study, and there may be something that doesn't follow this structure, but from every living organism that I've been able to find is that living organisms tend to move away from things that it perceives challenges life and moves towards things that it perceives enhances life. Now, children are the same. So they'll move towards mum or dad if they feel safe around mum or dad, and then they'll move away from things that it perceives it's scared of, or it's fearful of, or it worries about. Now, also, you've got to remember that when the parents, or when the sperm hits the egg, that you've got information from the mother and the father coming together in order to form new life. Now, we take on part of the imbalanced perceptions that our parents have. So this is why, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but you'll notice that you pick up traits from your parents. Now, part of that is a learned trait of the environment, but also some of the theories are that it's an epigenetic traits passed on from your parents. But you'll also notice that maybe your parents didn't express some of their traits, but later on in life, you start to pick it up. Also, the parent that you judge the most, and this seems to be fairly common in psychology or a common understanding, the parent that you judge or criticize the most tends to be the parent that you become throughout your life.
Interesting.
Which a lot of people don't want to hear, because especially if you don't like a parent, you go, I'm never like them. Mm-hmm. But you actually find that you are actually more common than what you think like them. So anyway, there's this whole evolutionary structure.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry?
I was just going to say, do you think that where you're talking about, the epigenetic qualities of your parent, do you think that has to do with nature versus nurture with regard to the traits that you take on from your parents?
I think it's a bit of both.
Right.
I think there's an environmental factor, but there's also the epigenetic factor of them actually passing on information to you genetically. And if we have a look at the genes just pass on information. So what I've been able to find is that information is the most common thing that evolves. You know, when we think about humans evolving, it may not be humans that evolve, it may be the information that humans carry that evolves. So it's just a slight tweak on the way we think about things. Now, I've solved problems that my parents had when they were younger that they weren't able to solve. And I solved some of those problems within my own life. But if I have kids, there are some of my problems that I won't have time to deal with within my life that I will pass on to my kids potentially if I have them. So, you know, a lot of parents feel guilty learning about that. But the truth is that every generation, we essentially have a whole bunch of problems that need to be solved in this generation. You know, right now we had global warming, which hasn't even really been discussed in the last 2 or 3 years. And from my understanding, the ice caps are actually expanding as of 2019. So the idea of the ice cap shrinking now, in geology, I believe it is, they're actually finding that they're starting to increase again. So anyway, going back to evolution and nurture versus nature, I think there are both impacts. So there's part of me growing up around my parents that I've taken on some of those traits, and there's also part of the epigenetics that have passed on some information that they've had. They pass on some of their fears, some of their worries, their concerns, and I have to learn how to maybe overcome those. If not, I repeat those patterns. And so what you find is that in generations, some people evolve patterns and some people repeat them.
Yeah. So how do you think that plays into, because you talk a lot about values as well, and how, you know, you need to have your core values. Do you think your parents like influence that predominantly, or do you think that is something that you need to expand past in order to be successful in life?
Well, there's a couple of, it's a really good question. Really good questions, actually. I like this because it allows me to go deep and to use my scientific brain a little bit more. But I believe from my understanding is a bit of both. So you've got the genetics that your parents pass on, and so maybe pick up some of the epigenetics from them. And then there's also the patterns throughout your life as well that you pick up, and values shift throughout your life. You know, some people in their 20s, they just care about partying and being around their friends. But once they get to around 30, all of a sudden their values shift and they go, I need to get married and have kids. Like, now's the time. And that becomes important to them. And in their 40s, it might be financial stability. And so throughout our life, values do shift, but it all depends. And every person on the planet has a different value system. They may have similar values that are the same, but different. You know, I know a lot of people who come to our events have a very high value on learning. Like, we get a lot of really smart people who come to our events, from corporate CEOs to entrepreneurs to small business owners to mums to dads, but they all have this common wanting to learn. You know, we have medical doctors and so on. So I know that they love to learn, and I don't know how I got onto learning. Oh, about
Value systems.
Values. Yep. So they all have similar values of learning, but they don't necessarily learn the same way that I learn. I find what I'm really inspired by is learning what makes people great. So I really don't get into a lot of the stuff that happens around disease and disease profiling. Like, I understand a fair bit of it, and sometimes more than the average, you know, maybe professional. But you know, I try not to get into that too much. I'm more worried about, how do we use that to enhance the quality of their life? How do we make it better? And I believe all of us, in some way, shape, or form, we develop part of our self-worth and our self-love and our self-respect. We develop those things through overcoming challenges and overcoming adversities. Now, when we butt up against a barrier or a challenge, or overcoming or coming up against adversity, a lot of people have learned that it's just easy to not deal with it. So they might watch TV, they might drink alcohol, they might take drugs, you know, they might get involved in other people's drama, because it's a way of avoiding dealing with what they really need to deal with in their own life, because it's easier in that moment. But what happens with that is, the more you keep doing that, the more you're lowering your confidence, your courage, your self-belief, your self-worth, and your self-love, your self-respect. And after a while, some people just go into a place where they go, you know what, life's just shit. Life's just shit. And it's almost that apathy where they've just given up.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in our society live like that. You know, I never thought that was the case, but a lot of people live like that. And it's just because they don't have a reason. So if I said to you, you know, like, I use this at my events. If I said to you, you know, you need to go to the city and you need to run around and you need to find, I've hidden something in the city, and if you find it, I'll give you $2. Most people will be like, stuff that, it's not even worth my time. But if I said I've put $20 million in there, I guarantee you'll probably spend weeks running around trying to find where I hid the thing that I hid, because there's a reason to do it. Now, what I found over time is that a lot of people set goals, but goals aren't really a reason, and goals can be really unfulfilling. In fact, a lot of the really successful people I work with are miserable and they've achieved a lot. So they may have, you know, I've worked with people who are billionaires. I've worked with people with hundreds of millions of dollars in their business, you know, and I've worked with professional athletes at a high level. And sometimes they'll come to me and they say, Michael, I want to end my life. And I go, why could anyone possibly want to end their life when, look at what you've done? But what I found was that they're goal driven, and goals aren't really fulfilling. They're not the point of life. The point of life is to create some sort of a meaning and an understanding around who you are and what you're here to do. Once you get really clear on that, which is your mission and your purpose, and also understand your values so that on a daily basis, you can do something that's fulfilling. When you do that, goals just become a stop-off point. They're just like a check-in. You know, it's, if I'm driving from Adelaide to Melbourne, you know, I'm going to stop at a roadhouse. I don't celebrate stopping at a roadhouse. I just get out, I buy some food, I get back in the car, I go to the bathroom or whatever, and then I keep driving. And that's essentially all the goal is. But most people who are driven in our society think that goals are the celebration. They're the thing. So they celebrate these little milestones that actually have no meaning at all. And they live this shitty existence of going, you know, I got to work hard, I got to push myself. And they're driven by pain. And then they get this goal and they go, woohoo, I've achieved something, how great. And then they go out and they spend money that maybe they've worked hard for, or they get drunk, or they overeat food, or whatever, however they celebrate. And then they look at themselves and they go, I just blew all my money. I just ate a heap of food after all my hard work, and now I've put back on my weight again. What the fuck? I think a lot of people mistake fulfillment with success, and a lot of highly successful people realize that they're unfulfilled. And there are also people who live quite fulfilled, but they also feel unsuccessful because they compare themselves to others and they're trying to fit in. And when you try to fit in, you're never going to stand out. You're never going to be yourself because you're more worried about what the tribe or the group think over what you think. And so there's a very fine line between how do we be ourselves and how do we also fit in, which is a very fine line. It's very hard because if you excel over a group, you then get called things or labeled things in our society like a narcissist, or that you're aggressive, or that you don't give a shit about people, which isn't true. It's just that some people have learned that the greatest fulfillment that they can have is to live their own life and do their own thing on their terms. But sometimes the tribe mistake that as, well, they don't care about others. But some people, those people who normally criticize, care so much about others that they actually stop caring about themselves. And they become martyrs in that group where they're living almost in a way where it's detrimental to their own life and their own fulfillment. So it all depends. Like life is I believe that in life we learn lessons. So to me, it's almost like school. In grade 1, you go through a whole bunch of lessons and then you get a test. If you pass the test, you go to the next grade, but the next grade's just as challenging as what you feel like the first grade was, because you learn all these lessons and you go, shit, I don't understand anything. It's all challenging. And then, you know, after a while, you get in your groove for a while. And then a test pops up and you go, oh shit, now I've got to study for it. And you get all stressed out again and frustrated. But if you pass that, you go to 3rd grade. Now in grade 2, or let's say grade 3, the exam's hard. It's stressful. You get frustrated. You're worried. You're nervous. There's all these problems that you don't know how to deal with. But when you get to grade 12 and you look back on grade 3, you go, I'll take that exam any day. That's just, it's easy. Like I could do that with my eyes closed. And life is exactly the same. Like I think most people think, when I get to this point, then life will be easy. And the truth is that life is never any easier, no matter what it is. You don't make more money and life gets easier. Life actually gets more complicated with more money. But most people don't realize that because they're chasing a fantasy. They're not actually chasing what it takes to achieve that thing because they're not really driven by it. They want the outcome without the work. Okay, I'd love a great body and never have to train. But the truth is, if I don't train, you don't get a great body. And life is just that training of learning lessons and then getting tests. And if you pass the test, you move to another level. There's just as many problems. There's more shit to learn. There's a lot of frustrations. There's lots of challenges. And again, this is life just repeating over and over and over again to expand.
If you guys enjoyed part 1 of our conversation with the Mojo Master, hit a like on this video, comment down below for more content and subscribe to this channel. Please also go over and give Michael's channel some love. I will leave that down below as well. And for more content and part 2, stay tuned.